One of my favorite parts about having this YouTube channel is how much interaction I have with some really great folks, people who watch my channel who have questions about how to maybe get the most out of their modeler of choice, whether they're using Helix, whether they're using Tonex, HX Stomp, even some folks that use modelers that I don't use. Some of the fractal modelers or even the quad cortex, I get questions from them because a lot of the things I talk about on this channel, while they may be specific to Helix, HX Stomp, or Tonex, can be applied to not only other modelers, but also just guitar tone in general, even if we're using a pedal board with real amps, such as dialing in certain effects, use of compression, reverb, you name it. And it's been a really enjoyable thing getting to know so many great folks and to help so many folks with hopefully dialing in their tones in a more efficient manner and to get to a better final result. Because I've had all of these interactions over the years, it's given me the unique perspective to kind of maybe understand more than some folks what a lot of the common problems are that a lot of folks are having when trying to create tones, regardless of which modeler they're using. So today I thought because of that, I would maybe run down the top 5 mistakes, and I'll say mistakes in quotes because I don't want to say that these things are always bad. I mean, if you're getting the results you want, then that's your answer. I am nobody to tell you that you should change it just because I maybe think that it's not the right way of doing it. And it really depends on the situation. So take everything I say today with a grain of salt. If you're doing any one of these things and not liking the results from it, then maybe that's a place to look to switch things up. But if you're super happy with your tone and maybe you're doing one of these things I'm going to talk about today, then carry on, continue. It's not my place to tell you to switch if you are getting the results you want. But I've kind of compiled these from quite a few years of people sending me their tones. I used to do a series years ago on my YouTube channel where people would submit their Helix tones and I would kind of break them down and fix them up for them to how I thought they might work better. And almost without fail, every time I did that, the viewer was super happy with the results, and it was sometimes just a small tweak. And then also from questions I've received over the years, I've kind of compiled these top 5 things that I feel if folks maybe address, they may get closer to that ideal tone that they're looking for. So without further ado, let's get started. So probably the number one, let's call it problem that I see is folks not using the appropriate monitoring system for the preset tone modeler profile that they're using. Now you might ask, what do you mean the appropriate monitoring system? I'm not here to tell you that you need to monitor your tone in a certain way, but if you aren't getting results that you're happy with, that's probably the first place to look. And the reason I bring this up though is because I have had a small number of people who've used my presets before that will contact me and say things such as, you know, this preset doesn't sound anything like in the video where you demoed it. And a lot of times I'm left scratching my head because quite frankly, I simply plug my guitar into, let's say it's the Helix that I'm using. I plug into the Helix. I record it oftentimes as an audio interface through USB, or maybe have it go SP-diff out into another audio interface. But what you're always hearing, the final result is just the preset as it is in the Helix. This is another funny thing I've had a lot of folks say, you must be processing it some other way before letting the viewer hear this. And I go, well, what would be the benefit to that? If I do that and then I sneakily don't tell anybody that I'm, running it through some magic processor, the end user is just going to be disappointed. That's not going to do any good for him or for me because nobody's going to be happy with the final result of the preset. And the other thing I always say is, well, what is this magic processor I would be running it through? Is it some special compressor or some special EQ? Well, if that was the case, why wouldn't I just do that within, let's say, the Helix preset? I can EQ it within there. I can compress it within there so that the end user gets the same results. So I am never doing that. I'm never adding anything to it. Even in the mixes when I'm demoing the songs, these are just the presets used without any other outboard EQ, compression, or any other things going on. They're simply just the preset. So that's what always makes me kind of scratch my head. Well, here's a couple examples what I've had people tell me. I've had viewers tell me that the Helix preset just sounds horrible. It's fizzy and buzzy and it just doesn't sound good. And after maybe a few more questions, I say, well, really, like, how are you running this? I say, well, it's not just your preset, it's every preset. And I go, okay, so there's got to be an issue here. I've had viewers tell me that they are feeding their Helix into their home stereo receiver, probably sending a line output into an input on there that it's not designed to handle, playing it through a set of hi-fi speakers, which are designed to color the music in a pleasant way. So that would be a perfect example of what I would consider an inappropriate monitoring system, because the preset was not designed to be played through that. Number one, the equipment you're plugging into is probably not designed to handle the output of the Helix, potentially, depending on how we have things set up and depending on what the two pieces of equipment are. So maybe that's where this fizzy buzziness is coming from. It's not the fault of the preset or the Helix, but rather the inappropriate setup and monitoring system. The hi-fi speakers might sound okay, but they're not really designed the way a normal FR speaker would be. Another example is I've had people take presets that have a built-in cab, whether in the Helix or in a Tonex tone model, and they run that into the front of their guitar amp, which is just going to then hit the preamp, power amp of that guitar amp, and then out into a real guitar speaker cabinet. Now we're sending a processed digital cab into a real guitar cab. It's going to filter that sound in a way that's not going to be what the original intended idea of that preset is going to be. Now, again, if you do this and it sounds fine, then carry on. If everybody's happy, then nobody else can tell you that you shouldn't be doing this. But if you're not getting the results you want, I would have to consider that an inappropriate way of monitoring. So we want to make sure that, if we have a preset or a tone model that has a built-in cab, that we're probably not running it through another actual guitar speaker cab. In that case, we maybe want to disable the built-in cab or IR on the modeler that we're utilizing and allow the real guitar speaker cabinet to do the work. We want to interface our modeler of choice with an appropriate piece of gear that's designed to handle whether it's a line signal coming out of it or whatever else it might be, so that we're not overloading another input and getting results that we don't want. And I speak just from experience in this. I've had a handful of people contact me telling me, I'm not getting great results. There must be something wrong with your preset. And then upon further digging, we find out that they actually aren't hooked up properly or not really utilizing the preset in the way that it was dialed in or intended. So a little bit of food for thought. I obviously can't cover all the quote unquote inappropriate situations in this video, but those are just a few examples. So if you aren't getting the results you want, maybe take a deeper look to see if you are interfacing with appropriate equipment and using an appropriate monitoring system, and maybe disabling cabs when you should be or enabling them when you should be. And I think that that could be the first place to look to really solve any problems we might be having with our tones. The next thing I want to talk about is inappropriate delay settings. A lot of folks like to use delay. Now, some folks don't. And if you don't use delay, then this doesn't apply to you. But I had received a lot of presets in the past that folks had dialed in. And they would tell me, well, this is just my lead, let's say, does not cut in the mix. It's buried, it's weak, it just doesn't work. And when I would get their preset, I would look at it and go, well, everything's actually not too bad in here. But man, oh man, when that delay is engaged, it just encompasses the entire tone and kind of washes it out and wipes it out. And I'm going to give you the example of this in a second. So inappropriate delay settings can do a lot to damage our tone. Let's go take a look at an example of what I'm talking about. So here I am over on Helix Native, which I'll be using today, and I'm playing my Vigier Expert Series Strat. Here is my JS2204 Ultimate preset that I have available on the Line 6 Marketplace. I'll have a link below to all of the preset and tone models that I use today if you like the tones and you want to grab them. So this is utilizing one of the new 3.5 cabs. And this is a tone I really love. And this has been an extremely popular preset of mine. A lot of folks have told me they're using as their main tone for live and studio playing. All right, so if I go to the lead snapshot on this, I have the delays engaged. And these are the settings that we come up with: a feedback of 27, mix of 30%. And I also set these always to kind of lock in with the tempo of whatever I'm playing. So you can hear just a nice subtle delay. It gives it some depth. It gives it a little bit of, I don't know if maybe softening is the word. It's going to help it to sit in the mix a little nicer. Maybe just settle it back in the mix. If I turn that off and play something similar. You can hear the obvious difference, and I think it does a beautiful job at what it's trying to accomplish. Now, this is going to be open to personal preference. Maybe somebody wants a little more feedback. Maybe somebody wants a little more mix or a little less mix. But a lot of times when I would receive preset from folks, I would get things like this. Now, you'll notice that all of a sudden, if I was to play that in a mix, whether live or in the studio, everything would just get buried and lost. Why do people do this? Well, my theory on that is that it makes it easier to play, right? We can play fast and all those notes are just going to run together and maybe cover up any sloppiness or errors that we have. You can't really tell what I played there and if it was sloppy or not. So, somebody who maybe is trying to play a little outside of their comfort zone might drench their tone in delay like this to cover it up. Well, I don't think that really does anybody any favors because it just sounds kind of like a mess, So basically going back to the settings that I have here, I have a lot less to hide behind. While that may cover things up and run the notes together a little bit, it also lets the original dry direct tone breathe a little bit. And I think it's a nice balance. So that's one of the main mistakes that I see a lot of folks make when dialing in their tones. Now, coming up here, you'll notice that I have a lot of effects that are potentially able to be used within this preset. And that's what my Ultimate Series presets are about that are on the Helix Marketplace is I add a full array of effects that we can use. Now, the thing is, I don't have all these turned on all the time. In fact, none of them are on by default, except on the lead. We have some delay and we have some reverb that's on pretty much all of the time. These effects are added in just if we want some color to a sound, maybe we want some flange, or maybe we want some phaser. And I do see a lot of folks will make the mistake of kind of doing too much. Now, sometimes we can add a ton of effects layered on top of one another for a special effect, for a small piece of a song. That's great. We can come up with some really creative, wonderful ideas. But if our main tone is always something like this, where we have delay, a bunch of modulation effects, a couple of reverbs on all the time as our main core tone, we may run into some issues with, again, our tone being able to sit in a mix or cut in a mix, or anybody even be able to hear us while playing with a band or in a studio performance. Now, you might laugh at this and say, well, nobody would do this, but I can assure you many people do. And again, it may just be because they're trying to hide something in their playing. Now, you might at first listen, kind of go, that's not terrible. Well, no, it's not terrible if we were using that as inspiration for maybe one guitar riff. If that was the intro to a song and we wanted that really washed out, spacey sound, and then maybe the band kicks in and all of this is pretty much turned off now, and we go back into... That's going to be a much nicer effect. And if that was our core tone, we're probably going to have a more successful time being heard in a mix. So again, simplicity is important. Just because we have a lot of toys available at our fingertips inside of these modelers, tons of modulation, tons of reverb, tons of delay, doesn't mean we have to turn them on and use them all at the same time. So that's another very common problem that I would see when taking a look at some tones that others would send me for some advice on how to maybe get them to work a little bit better. A lot of times I would just turn stuff off and then they'd go, oh, wow, that's much better. But we do have to concentrate more on our playing. We want to avoid anything that we are doing just to cover up anything in our playing that we don't like. It would be better just to keep the tone what it is and work on the playing side of things. So another big problem I see is the use of too much reverb. And again, this could be used for the same reason as the other things that I've mentioned, where we're just trying to cover up something in our playing. Maybe we're trying to bury the sound of things and get ourselves to sit further back in the mix. And that's exactly what's going to happen. The bigger and more overt the reverb, the more it's going to kind of pull ourselves back in the mix, whether we're playing live or in the studio. So for these next examples, I'm going to be utilizing Tonex just so that we can talk about different modelers and see how this doesn't just apply to Helix or just to Tonex. So we do have our reverb module up here. I'm using a preset from my Rect Z Ultimates tone model bundle. The link will be below to that if you like what you hear here. This is a killer set of tone models that I created with my Dr. Z Z-Rec Jr., which is one of my favorite amps. It's just such a beautiful amp. Sounds so incredible. But if we come up to our reverb here, here's the core tone with the reverb, how I would probably more typically set it. I believe my settings were actually like this. Now, if we listen to that with no reverb, I did a video last week about Tonex and utilizing the reverb to just instantly kind of make any tone model better. I've got to remember that these captures don't capture any of the room ambience. And if we're especially listening on headphones, a modular tone is going to be very dry and direct and almost unnatural sounding, because we don't have any of that natural room ambience that normally exists, whether we realize it or not. So I like to always add a little bit of room reverb just to get people started. Just adds a little bit of depth to the sound. But here's the problem. I see this a lot of times. People will do this, and again, they have this huge long decay and this really high mix. And they use this maybe as their core tone. All of a sudden you can tell that the tone is being sucked back into this cavernous reverb, and you can tell in a mix, again, this is going to get buried. We're not going to cut anymore. We're not going to hear what's going on with our tone. We might be scratching our going, why does this not cut through the mix? And again, some folks might do this because when we are playing a tone like this with that much reverb, it might feel like a bit of a safety net to cover up maybe some inconsistencies in our playing or some maybe sloppiness. So, you know, again, we got to be very careful with this. We can get away with a nice amount of reverb if we're doing things like just single notes. Maybe more sustained, but if we're using our core tone where we're playing a busier part, we would probably want to think about pulling our settings back, maybe like this. You know, maybe even more if we're comfortable enough. You can see the tone takes on a very different life when we don't bury it in reverb. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the use of a compressor. A lot of folks who follow my channel know that I use compression on almost everything. And I've actually been criticized for that before. So, oh, we don't need compression on this. We don't need to put compressor after reverb or delay, or, you know, but it all depends on how we use the compression. If we're using a very overt compression, then a lot of things have to be avoided. And I notice a lot of people with compression, again, maybe it's to cover up inconsistencies in their playing and to just smooth everything out so that there's no dynamics left. But a lot of folks misuse it. Now, one of the biggest ways is to just set too high a threshold where they'll boost this up and get loads of gain reduction. So no matter what they hit, it's always the same volume. There is no such thing at these compressor settings as playing dynamically. I'm playing extremely light there. Even with my fingers. What it's doing is it's evening out all the notes, whether I play really loud or soft. You guys have no way of knowing whether I'm hitting loud or soft other than the tone does change a little bit and how hard the front of the amp is hit. But you see, I have tons of gain reduction regardless, so there is no more dynamic playing here. If I was just to turn this back down, now you can see if I hit softly. You can really hear a difference in when I play dynamically, and that's how I want to be able to play. If I want to express myself in a solo and all of a sudden just tuck my pick away and I think the noise gate is actually clamping in a little bit there when I'm trying to play really dynamically. But you see the difference. If I move this threshold way up, I can't do that anymore. No matter how soft I hit, it kind of brings those notes up to the same level as if I'm going. Now that might be fine if we're doing some crazy country chicken picking style things, and that's what you want. That's great, but you're doing that with a purpose. If that's your go-to setting on a compressor, I would maybe suggest getting that threshold back to an area so that when we're hitting hard, it's just starting to kiss the gain reduction. When we're hitting soft, it's maybe not even doing anything at all. Something like that might be a nicer kind of always on setting for a compressor. And that, again, is another real problem I've seen with a lot of folks I've had the pleasure of discussing their tones with. And it's an easy fix. Bring that threshold down, set it up more appropriately. I'll put that in quotes because, again, it depends on taste and it depends on the situation. But if you set it in that manner, you might find that your tones just instantly improve. All right, so there you have it. Those are probably the 5 most common mistakes. Again, I'll put in quotes, mistakes that I've seen with folks who aren't happy with their tones. And maybe some people are doing all of those in the same tone modeler preset and really just compounding a bunch of small problems into one giant problem and really not getting the results they want. So if you try those tips, maybe it'll be just the thing. Maybe just one of them, maybe all of them, maybe a couple of them, but it might be just a thing to get you where you want and to improve your tone immediately. I hope that that was helpful. I'm going to leave you today with the 2 demos for the 2 presets, tone models that I played for you today. The Rect Z Ultimate Tone Model Bundle for Tonex, the link will be below for that, and also the 2204 Ultimate Line 6 Marketplace preset that I have available for Helix, and I have a similar version available for HX Stomp. The links for all of those will be below. I'll leave you with those demos, and I hope you enjoy those. Please like the video, share with anybody you think will get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in and sharing your time with me. Ciao for now.